memory is probably a starting point for all my creative projects, whether it's, childhood memories initially inspiring me to kind of visit places, whether that be Poland or the East End, and then collecting and gathering people's stories is at the root of all of my work. So I think my work has started through exploring my own story, my own heritage, and then led on to exploring others. And all of these memories have always been kind of focused on place, and Brick Lane in particular, and the whole area of the East End has been a place that's fascinated me for a very long time, and a place that has mystical, kind of spiritual resonances, a kind of secret geography lying underneath it, which I think comes from an intensity of activity which has happened in that landscape. And it's like all these memories and stories have been kind of compressed literally into the kind of fabric of the place. And I see my work as an artist and a writer to try and unravel some of that. And that desire becomes intensified as areas are being regenerated heavily, as that entire area is. And literally as the kind of pavements are being dug up and the old buildings are being knocked down and replaced with these kind of walls of steel and glass, that need becomes stronger. I mean, all these kind of hidden stories are literally being lost, and the people that can tell them are dying or moving away at a rapid rate. And it makes me panic. And that's the kind of root of what I do, really. My father's parents were Polish-Jewish refugees who settled in the East End in the 1930s, where they met and married, and they had their first watchmaking shop and marital home on the corner of Brick Lane and Princess Street. I'd spent the previous 3 summers travelling around Poland by myself, reconnecting with family members and visiting Jewish sites. And whilst I was there, I came across many synagogues, like the synagogue in Princess Street. All were then deconsecrated, and many were being used as, clothing factories and grain stores and things. And to come across this building in the East End that looked as if it had been directly transported from Eastern Europe was a very powerful moment for me, kind of walking into that building. And I later found out that my grandparents had had their first home and business on the corner of Princess Street and Brick Lane, and it's very likely that they got married in that synagogue. I don't have their wedding ketubah to check, but I imagine that they probably did. So it just felt like a really powerful place for me to be. And later I discovered the story of David Rodinsky, the Orthodox recluse, who lived in the attic rooms above the synagogue for most of his life and disappeared at some point in the 1960s, leaving behind a locked room with all of his belongings left inside. And the room wasn't opened up again until 1980. And when it was, everything was there just exactly as he'd left it.
Unable to produce my own work, I became increasingly drawn to Rodinsky's room. It no longer existed in its original state, as an abandoned tomb. The room had been dismantled, the contents boxed up by the Museum of London, then taken to storage rooms to dry out in stable conditions, before being returned to the synagogue. When I first saw the room, Rodinsky's belongings were neatly piled away in archival boxes lining the walls in large stacks, At first, outside the boxes, the room seemed to contain little evidence of Rodinsky's long time in residence, but gradually I began to uncover the clues. I found his old gramophone records lying under the bed, and a large collection of dust-covered empty beer bottles in a cupboard in the corner. Stiffened pyjamas and fossilized blankets still remained in his wardrobe. While fondling his piano one day, I lifted the lid to discover faint traces of pencil on the ivory keys. Strange, indecipherable symbols, written in his own hand. In the centre of the wooden ceiling was a rusty gas lamp, surrounded by a charcoal halo from constant use. The peeling wallpaper behind the door had also been marked, with faint traces of handwriting hidden beneath the sodden edges. More often than not, the cold or the overwhelming sensation of being watched would drive me out of the room, with the hairs on the back of my neck prickling. But every day I would be back at the table, fascination overcoming fear. Gradually, over time, through careful examination of his vast collection, a faint image of a man began to emerge, a scholar harbouring secrets, a meticulous annotator of texts, a comedian, an enigma. I discovered handwritten notebooks revealing his knowledge of languages: Sumerian, Arabic, Japanese, Hebrew, Yiddish, Greek and Russian, and of Egyptian hieroglyphics. I found an old rent book that dated back to 1936. I found one notebook full of Irish drinking songs written in thick red capital letters. And one day I discovered a crumpled Kabbalistic diagram stashed behind his wardrobe.
Through researching David Rodinsky's story, I was also delving into the story of my own family history and exploring how I felt about my own Jewish identity and heritage. And it was a journey that kind of took me from one room on a much kind of wider journey. So I felt a connection with him as a person. And I also felt on a very strong level that I was meant to be telling his story, and somehow through the doing of that we were both set free. And when I discovered that he died just a few days before I was born, there is this way of thinking in Kabbalistic thought that if a soul hasn't finished its work on earth, then it will kind of enter another kind of ideas of a Dibuk, really. And it's kind of added a different dimension to the kind of quest that I was on. And I really felt very strongly that I was meant to be telling Rodinsky's story, and I had to find out the truth, and I had to find out what had happened to him. It was dense, the atmosphere in the building. It was like stepping back through time, walking through those doors. It was also overwhelming. And sometimes I would just run out of the building with this sense, that there were others there, almost. A very magical place. It symbolised to me disappearing Jewish worlds, really. The lost world of Eastern European Jewry, and also of the Jewish East End.